Hi everybody, my name is Sergiu. This is the fifth and last part in the Nikon SB-910 series, and we're talking about off-camera flash. So the idea today is that since we've already covered all the other modes in the previous videos, we can just go ahead and talk about off-camera flash. Now, all the modes we've discussed are available with off-camera flash, but just as a recap, in the first video we spoke about manual and GN modes, but also manual flash theory, overall specs and batteries, and then we covered TTL and TTL-BL in the second video, and then A and AA non-TTL auto flash in the third video, and then repeating flash in the fourth video, and we discussed all the CLS features that are supported through the 910. Now, today is all about what the 910 does when using these features off camera. Now, there are a bunch of different ways that you can use the 910 as an off-camera speedlight, but let's have a look at the specs and then I'll show you how it all tested out. The specs for off-camera flash read as follows. The Nikon SB-910, as we mentioned before, is part of Nikon's Creative Lighting System, or CLS. The 910 supports the entire set of CLS features apart from radio communication. It features 4 different CLS-compatible ways for the flash to talk to a CLS-compatible camera while it is not in the hot shoe, 2 of which are wired and 2 are wireless. The wired modes use rather a PC or prompter comport cable for the screw lock connection, or a TTL cable such as the Nikon SC29, which acts as a short hot shoe extension and features an AF assist light. The wireless modes are called AWL or Advanced Wireless Lighting and SC4, which is an optical trigger solution. All the modes that support TTL feature iTTL, Nikon's third generation of TTL technology. It's important to understand that the 4 different off-camera ways that the Nikon SB-910 can be used with a compatible CLS camera are rather different from each other. CLS features are more or less available across the different modes. Let's have a look at the 4 off-camera options. The PC screw lock wired connection uses the 910's trigger voltage to trigger the flash. That's it. There are 2 wires in the cable, and the camera shutter simply closes the trigger circuit, thus firing the flash just like it has done for many decades. All the settings need to be manually dialed in via the 910's control panel at the back, and only rear curtain sync is available with PC syncing, which is more or less usable depending on which flash mode is being used. The 910 can use manual mode, GN mode, non-TTL auto without monitor flashes, and repeater mode as far as the flash modes are concerned. TTL is also listed but cannot be used due to the CLS link not being available with the PC syncing. This mode is compatible with any camera that offers PC syncing, even a camera make that is a Nikon. The TTL extension cable is a hot shoe extension and carries all the contacts, thus enabling the CLS link, just like plugging straight into the hot shoe. That means that everything we already discussed and tested in the previous videos applies here, while allowing the photographer to shine the flash at the subject from the left or the right or up or down. This is the only off-camera solution that offers all the CLS features all at once. Some extension cables also offer AF assist illumination. Since everything we already discussed also applies here, we are not gonna cover this kind of cable today. However, do keep in mind that there are some limitations, such as the fact that these cables are quite short. For example, considering the information that is being communicated between the speedlight and the camera, such as distance information from the lens, having a very long cable would then render wrong results with the related CLS features. It is, however, a great feature when used correctly, and it will most probably look better than a hot shoe flash, so by all means use it. The AWL, or Advanced Wireless Lighting feature, uses a commander unit or the commander function, such as the one built into the 910, to emit a pre-flash sequence called a command sequence. These pre-flashes are incredibly fast, and they are encoded with commands that the remote speedlights are looking out for by using their IR sensors at the side of their body. These command flashes are fired before the shutter opens, and they tell the remote flashes how to fire. You can read more in depth about the command pre-flash sequence on forums and blogs if you wish to study it in depth. The Nikon SB-910 has a fully featured built-in AWL commander, and it can also be an AWL remote. This is purely optical one-way communication between the commander and the remote. Only the IR component of the xenon light is used, which is why the sensors have IR filters covering them, and there are IR pass filters available to buy for all Nikon commander speedlights if you need them, as some people may blink as soon as they see the command flashes. There are 4 flash modes available with this wireless option: AWL TTL, wireless auto aperture with monitor flashes, wireless manual, and wireless repeater. Flash compensation is available where applicable. Syncing functions such as red eye reduction, slow and rear curtain sync are also available, and FV lock, auto FP high speed sync, flash color communication, and exposure parameter communication are employed and can be used due to the fact that the commander uses the CLS camera link. The metering area for AWL FV lock is the entire frame. It's also important to note that all of these functions are CLS functions and will only work with CLS compatible cameras. The CLS cameras usually have a commander function available with their built-in pop-up flash, which is handy, but if you're using a dedicated commander or the commander function built into your Speedlight, you then need to have that Speedlight or commander unit plugged into the hot shoe. AWL needs the CLS link in order to work. The commander function can command up to 3 groups of remotes, meaning that any number of remotes that are being set up to work within a group will all fire based on the same command and cannot be controlled individually. Only individual groups can be controlled by the user. If you're using a 910 as a commander, you also have the option to use the commander itself, so the 910, as a Speedlight as well, and record each light together with the other Speedlights in the system. The groups then have a channel number assigned to them as a whole, and there are 4 different channels to choose from. This is useful when up to 4 Nikon shooters are in close proximity with each other, as they can assign a specific channel to this system in order to avoid firing each other's Speedlights by accident. The commands are sent for each group consecutively, meaning that the more groups are being used, the longer it takes to flash all the commands, and that may cause some issues such as unwanted blinking of the subject, but FV lock comes in handy for such situations. Next, there are a few things that need to be mentioned regarding the flash modes available with AWL. AWL TTL is not TTL, neither is it TTL-BL, but is its own system which has some TTL-BL features but differs from TTL-BL. We already mentioned that the 910 has a built-in commander and that the 910 itself can take part in the exposure if you wish. If you decide to do this, then it's important to understand that the 910 itself will use regular TTL-BL, while the remote groups will behave much like TTL-BL when used with a non-CPU lens, meaning that the lighting within the metering area will be dropped as soon as the reflections from the subject or any other object that is closer to the lens are detected. However, unlike TTL-BL, the system will look at the remote group reflections, it will mix them together so that they are all equal in brightness regardless of where the actual remotes are in space, as long as they are within range, and it will drop the brightest reflections across the metering area to mid-tone rather than field level, and all without doing any averaging or taking distance into account because group speedlights are not on camera. This makes it easy to add extra speedlights and spread the load across groups because all the groups will be equally as bright across the metering area, and while the commander itself is on camera and will use regular TTL-BL if you decide to record the light from it, this functionality still applies and there will not be overexposure. AWL TTL also offers a balanced field function which engages if the ambient exposure is at 0 EV or above, but this time it does not matter which metering system the camera uses for ambient. It will work with all 3 systems, including the commander itself, which means that this time the 910 will engage TTL-BL with spot metering as well when in commander mode. The TTL metering area is the same as before. Wireless auto aperture with monitor flashes works much like it does on camera, meaning that each speedlight is doing its own individual metering, and FV lock is available as well as all the other syncing functions. Wireless manual is just like manual, only wireless. Once again, this is not an optical trigger. AWL is a CLS mode and only works with CLS compatible hardware from Nikon. Same goes for wireless repeating flash. Also, while AWL TTL does take into account whether you have multiple speedlights set up, the other modes do not, and it's important to remember that the speedlights will add on top of each other, causing overexposure if you're not careful. And last but not least, the SU4 wireless option actually is an optical trigger solution. The SB-910 can be either a trigger or a remote. When in SU4 master mode, which is used to trigger all the speedlights in SU4 mode as well as typical optical trigger speedlights, only manual, GN and auto aperture without monitor flashes are available, obviously because the other modes use more than one flash for effects or monitoring and will cause the remotes to fire at the wrong time. Auto FP high speed sync is not available either because it needs to strobe in order to work, and red eye reduction uses the camera's own AF assist lamp instead. FV lock is not available because pre-flashes can't be used. Rear curtain sync, red eye reduction and exposure parameter information transfer are available while the Speedlight is plugged into the hot shoe and the CLS link is formed. However, you may also use the master with a PC screw lock cable. You will lose the CLS link in this case, and only rear curtain sync and auto, not auto aperture, will be available. The SB-910 can also be an optical trigger remote. The same sensor is used that is used for AWL. In remote mode, two modes are available, manual and auto. In auto, the 910 will fire in sync with the duration of the trigger flash, so it will power on as soon as it sees the trigger flash and off when the trigger flash goes off. The longest duration that the 910 can be on is 1/880th of a second, which is full power. This is very similar to A and AA modes, only it uses the IR sensor for syncing rather than the sensor at the front. Check with your trigger flash manual for durations. In manual mode, however, you need to dial in the power output by yourself and the Speedlight will fire in sync with the trigger. The SB-910, much like all the other CLS Speedlights, comes with an audible beeping signal that tells the photographer it's ready to fire while in remote mode. There are two LEDs at the front which blink, signaling an error or that the 910 is in remote mode. Remember that there is no communication from the 910 to a camera when used with a PC cable, AWL or SU4 remote, only the other way around. The 910 will then use its beeps and lights to tell the photographer that there is a problem by beeping and flashing its ready lights multiple times. And with that being said, that's it for the off-camera options and specs. All the CLS features are being covered, but as you can see, only using a TTL cable actually enables the full set of CLS features, the other modes do not. But a TTL cable is very short, so each of these modes comes with some sort of compromise, but hopefully one of them will fit your application. Now that we know about all those different modes, let's have a look at them. Now, they are quite different from each other, but after all, they make use of functions we've already discussed and tested, so we don't have to go through the entire story again. Now, I already took the test photos, and I'll be going through the setup and settings for each different approach. First, we're going to look at the PC syncing option, then at the AWL option, and then the SU4 option. Now, I'm going to skip the TTL cable option, because as it says in the specs, that's basically the same thing as we've basically already covered in the other videos, but while you're holding the Speedlight in your hand basically. So my setup is the same as last time, so that you can see the feed straight out of the camera. So yeah. Right, so the PC syncing option uses one of those PC syncing cords, just like this one, which you can get really cheaply from Amazon. I think this is 3 meters long, and that's the plugs right there. So that basically plugs, one end plugs into your Speedlight, like so, and then you screw that in, and then the other end plugs into your camera. Now, given that your camera actually has one of those ports, mine does, just like that, and you're pretty much all set. Basically, this is the mode in which you're gonna have to dial in all your exposure info at the back of the 910. But yeah, let's have a look at the screen. So after you plugged in your PC sync cord, set the 910 to the on position and you're ready to choose your mode. As you can see from this list, we have auto without monitor flashes, GN, manual, repeating flash, and TTL is also listed but doesn't actually work. Trying to take a shot in this mode will make the test button blink, signaling an error. TTL needs the CLS link to work, and remember, the PC sync cord only carries the 910's trigger voltage. All you need to do after choosing your mode is you need to manually dial in your exposure information. For ISO, you need to go into the menu and scroll all the way to the ISO tab and select your ISO. For aperture, you need to use the third function button while on the main screen. We already discussed how to work these modes in the previous videos, so we're not covering that here. Now, as far as the test pictures are concerned for this option, it seems to have worked pretty well. I tested out each mode based on what we already know from the previous videos. So basically, let's have a look. So the first picture, the one you're looking at now, is in auto, and we got a mid-tone grey exposure, well, nearly mid-tone grey, but it's close enough. Next up, we have GN mode. Now this is natural looking exposure, as you would expect. Next up after that, we got manual, which is close enough. I got it just about right. It's a bit brighter than GN, but it's just about right, I would say. And then we have repeating flash. Now I just used my my other big tape recorder for this, and just froze the motion of the reels just like we did before. This is with 2 flashes, and this is with 3 flashes. I think it looks pretty cool. So yeah, that's not too bad. I think it's a very straightforward option to use. I mean, you just basically just plug in, dial in your exposure, and you know, just take the shot. I think manual users will actually love this mode. But yeah, next up we got AWL. And this is the fun one. This option is the first wireless option we're going to look at. Now once again, AWL works only with a CLS system. No matter which mode you shoot, the remotes will only listen to an AWL commander, nothing else. So let's have a look at the back of the 910 now. You know, first at the commander and then at the remote screens. For commander, make sure you plug your 910 into the hot shoe of your camera or through a TTL cable and set your 910 to the master position. Once you can see the CLS camera link, you may now choose the channel you want to broadcast your commands on by pressing the third function button and choosing a channel. Then, you need to choose what you want your remote groups to do. You can see 4 group options on the screen. The first one, labeled M, is actually the master or commander, so basically the 910 itself. You may choose whether you want the light from it to take part in the exposure or not. Press the select button multiple times until the M option at the top is highlighted, and then press the mode button and choose between TTL, auto aperture with monitor flashes, and yes, this is with monitor flashes, although the monitor flash symbol doesn't show up, and manual. If you choose the 3- line symbol, that means that the commander itself does not contribute to the exposure. You also have per group flash compensation if you choose a mode that offers compensation. Press the flash compensation button and dial in your value of choice. The remote groups A, B and C work in exactly the same way. Press the select button multiple times until you reach the group you want to set up, and then use the mode button to dial in a mode you want to use. If the remote speedlights do not support a mode you chose, such as AA for example, they will beep and flash the ready lights multiple times, signaling that they can't fire in that mode. The commander may also be a repeating flash commander. To access this, you need to go into the menu, select the commander repeating flash tab and set it to on. Now, the repeating flash commander shows up. Here, the mode button doesn't do anything. All you need to use is the select button. Keep pressing select until you reach the setting that you want to change. Dial in the value and press OK. The power setting, number of flashes and frequency of flashes are global settings for the master and the 3 groups. The master and groups only have an on and off option, meaning that they rather fire during exposure or they don't. We already discussed how to set up the repeating flash, so we're not covering that here. The test fire button test fires the remotes, and they will flash once regardless of settings to tell the user that there's a clear line of sight between the commander and the remote. Also, in the menu you have the option to change the 910 standby behavior by going into the standby tab and choosing between auto and a certain number of seconds. In auto, it will go into standby when the camera is turned off or when it turns off its meter, given that the 910 is plugged into the hot shoe of course. The zoom function works in the same way across both master screens. But let's have a look at the remote option. For that, you need to set the 910 to the remote position. The remote screen is fairly straightforward. Once again, the mode button doesn't do anything. Press the select button to select between the group tab or channel tab and use the scroll wheel to select your preferred option and press OK. Use the zoom button to dial in a zoom head position or illumination pattern and the musical note to mute the audible beep that the speedlight emits to signal that it's ready to fire again. The speedlight also uses light signals to signal its ready state. If you go into the menu, under the Ready tab, you may choose whether you want to see the front LEDs, the rear LED behind the test fire button, or both. You may also choose whether you want the LCD backlight off while operating. This will turn off the backlight while not in the menu. This only works when you're not connected to the hot shoe, because if you are, the backlight will come back on when the camera is active. The reason why it works here while in a hot shoe is because we've set the 910 to the wireless remote position, and as a remote, the 910 does not talk to the camera, it's just waiting for commands. Well, I think that's it for the AWL screen and controls. Now, let's have a look at the test results. Now the issue that I'm having here is that my 910 is the only 910 that I have basically, so I can only test it as a remote. And what am I doing here? And I do have a couple of SB-600s right here, which work just fine, but this video is about the 910, so I can't really bring those in because they do not match the 910 in specs. But I have used the 910 as a commander for those, and I can tell you from my experience with that it works just fine. Now I'm using my camera's own built-in commander, which unfortunately doesn't have repeating mode, so I can't test that, but there's no reason it shouldn't work. And I can tell you it works exactly like we discussed in the previous videos, only that you have multiple speedlights. I have used the 910 as a remote, as a repeating commander to the 600s, and by the way, and that works just fine. Yeah, only if I had another 910, but you know, hey ho. Alright, so let's start with AWL TTL. Now, we know from the specs that AWL TTL is its own thing. Now, my subjects were the two pieces of paper that I used for the TTL and TTL-BL video, and but also I did not record the light from the commander itself, and by that I mean the commander built into the camera, the one that I use for the 910. Because that will give me an exposure that looks exactly like TTL-BL, which we've discussed already. So we'll discuss how that works. And yes, I can confirm that it engages with spot metering as well. So I just tested the 910 as an AWL remote, and I tested for two things. Now first, I had a look at whether the brightest reflections are mid-tone and whether it does averaging or not. And so I took some pictures as I was sliding the white paper slowly into the metering area, and you know, I was expecting it to immediately drop to mid-tone as soon as it makes it in. I also expected it to stay at that tonality no matter how much metering area it occupies, and I also tested the balance field function with all 3 ambient meters. And yeah, I shot in the same way I did in the TTL video. So basically, let's just have a look at how this came out. So if you have a look here, as you can see there to the right, you can see the white paper slowly sliding in, like so. And nothing is happening because it didn't make it into the metering area or close to it, but once it does, you can see here that it starts to drop to mid-tone. And then once it makes it in, you got, you know, pretty much dead on mid-tone gray. And it basically just stays there all across. See? No changes at all. Until, boom, all of a sudden it makes it out. And now we got the darker paper within the metering area, and that is now mid-tone gray, which is to be expected. And let's see what happens as we slide that one out. And we're slowly sliding towards the background, and boom. You know, same idea basically. Same thing. So yeah, that worked out just about right. And now here we have the balanced field shots. Now these will look darker than the ones that you saw in the TTL-BL video, because remember, this is not TTL-BL, because I didn't record the light from the master, I just recorded the light from the remote, basically. So, and that, as you just saw, it just drops to mid-tone gray, which makes it look a bit darker. But anyway, we're now matrix metering, so as you can see here, what I'm gonna do is same as last time. I'm just gonna bring up the ambient, and we're gonna see what happens. So ambient is coming up, and then boom, once it reached 0 EV, then you can now basically see that it engaged field flash, which is pretty cool. And next up we have center weighted metering. Now same idea here. Obviously I'm sliding slightly towards the window there because it's center weighted, so I had to capture it. And boom, same thing. See, once it's reached 0 EV, you now have the balanced field function which engaged, which is pretty cool. And next up we have spot metering. See the spot metering symbol there right next to M. So same idea here. Nothing changes until boom, we reached 0 EV, and as you can see that is balanced field with spot metering, which is interesting to say the least. Yeah, I mean, it seems to work as expected. It does behave as I read it would, so that's good. It does work with spot metering, which could be an inconvenience, but at the same time it could be just perfect for you. Depends on how you how you look at it, really. Now let's talk about auto aperture with monitor flashes. Now luckily this works just like before, so we don't have to expect different behavior. So what I've done is, you know, I'm just expecting a mid-tone image when I fire it at a wall, basically, which is, I'm testing it in the same way I did last time. So it's just that the speedlight is off camera. So let's have a look. So as you can see here, we have a dead-on mid-tone gray picture. And this is with monitor flashes, so it's a bit more accurate, remember. Yeah, so that's just about right. Okay, so let's have a look at manual now. Now, manual is manual, only off camera, so you know, we have to measure the distance between the speedlight and the subject, and then we have to multiply that with the f-stop value to, you know, find the guide number and its equivalent power output at ISO 100. Now, I shot at ISO 100, but if you're not shooting at ISO 100, if you're shooting at a higher ISO, don't forget to divide your flash to subject distance and aperture product by the ISO factor based on the ISO you're going for, because higher ISO means that you're going to need the lower guide number, aka power output, because otherwise you're gonna, you know, you're basically just gonna overexpose the shot. So we already discussed how that works in the first video. Now I'm not using a mod, but remember, if you are using a mod and you don't have a light meter, at least take a picture with a bare head and then use that as a reference, and then put the mod on and take pictures as you're basically just increasing the power output until it visually matches the reference in brightness. Basically, that's you know, one of the ways to work around that. But yeah, let's have a look at this particular exposure. So there you have it. That's Commander manual, as you can see there. Well, Commander, it's in manual, and you can see the harsh shadows, because as I said, it was just a bare head, but it looks like a correct exposure to me, so quite happy with that, I would say. So basically, you know, that's about it for AWL. I would say it just looks about right, and it works. It does what it does, you know. So let's have a look at SU4. Now SU4 is an optical trigger and remote solution. That's pretty straightforward, and as it says in the specs, the SU4 Master uses modes that avoid triggering remotes prematurely by removing any sort of pre-flashes or repeating flashes, or, you know, monitor flashes or strobe. I mean, as I'm sure you know, it's all about firing once, and the remote has two modes, auto and manual. In auto, it's using the side IR sensor, so basically the same sensor that's being used for AWL, to do pretty much what auto and auto aperture modes do, without monitor flashes of course. But instead of looking at its own output, the 910 is looking at the flash duration of another flash and matches its output to that. So yeah, and in manual, you set the power output manually, and it will fire at that output once it detects another speedlight firing, basically. So, but you do have to be careful though, because remember, this is looking for IR, and that means that anything that emits enough electromagnetic radiation in that spectrum can trigger the flash, if it's powerful enough to read over the trigger threshold that the 910 system is calibrated at. And honestly, by anything, I really mean anything, and let me show you actually. So this is a TV remote, right? It uses IR. So look what happens when I point this at the 910 and I press a button, right? Obviously don't do that to your speedlight, but just saying. So you're gonna have to be careful with your IR, you know, even your phone or whatever that's close enough to the 910, it could trigger it, basically. That's one of the things that that's a downside of SU4. Anyway, so with all that being said, let's have a look at the screen. Accessing the SU4 mode is done by setting your speedlight to rather the remote position or the master position if you're using it as a master, and then going into the menu, scrolling to the wireless tab and choosing SU4 instead of advanced. This time it doesn't matter if your speedlight is plugged into the hot shoe or not. If you're using it as a master, you can use it with the PC port. You will, however, lose the CLS link if you don't have it plugged into the hot shoe, which means that you have to manually dial in exposure information, and you can't use auto aperture, only auto. This is the master screen, and we are in SU4 mode, as you can see in the top left corner. Here you have 3 modes you can choose from. Press the mode button and you have auto aperture, GN and manual. Remember that GN mode is not available when bouncing. If you're using a mode that offers flash compensation, you may compensate. The zoom function is the same as before. Now let's have a look at the remote screen. Here you can use the mode button to choose between auto, manual and off. Off means that it won't do anything, it won't fire. In manual, you may use the function buttons to dial in power outputs or to mute the ready to fire beep. Also, the power setting between half and full power is a full stop, while everything else is third stops. Apparently, this may be an issue with some cameras when it comes to shutter syncing, so you may go into the menu and under the manual output value steps tab, choose to use third stops between 1/2 and full power. In auto, it will beep and flash the ready lights multiple times in case it had fire at full power, while following a longer flash than its 1/880th of a second maximum output. That may signal an exposure issue. Now, as far as the menu is concerned, I've been covering items which were relevant to that particular video or mode. The menu items we haven't covered are convenience items such as LCD contrast, meters or feet for distance measurements, or whether you want to be able to change the zoom head position while the diffusion panel is being used or broken. Normally when the diffusion panel is on, you can't change the zoom head position, but if you enable this setting, you can. It may be useful in case the diffusion panel is broken and prevents you from changing the position of the zoom head. The only menu items left allow you to set up a custom menu if you want with the My Menu tab, while the version tab tells you the firmware version and the reset tab resets the Speedlight. Now, testing this is pretty straightforward. Using the master in SU4 mode is literally like using auto or auto aperture or GN or manual, which we already covered. So I only took a couple of pictures while using it in remote mode. Now in the first picture I had the 910 in remote auto and I used one of the SB-600s, right, one of these guys, as a master. In auto you're thinking in terms of durations basically, or flash duration. So obviously this is auto, so you're free to do trial and error by moving the 910 backwards or or forwards or closer or further from the subject, and just taking test shots until you have the correct exposure. But if you want to be accurate, you need to consider the flash duration of the master and how much light the 910 will put out for that amount of time. So I worked out a power output of 1/16 for the master, which in the case of the SB-600 is a flash duration of 1/11,100th of a second. Now at approximately that duration and the zoom head position of 70 I think I had, the 910 has a guide number of roughly 12 meters or so. So the 910 had to be further back than the 600. Now once you get used to it, it's quite easy to eyeball distances in this mode. And then I stopped down the lens aperture by 1 stop since I had 2 speed lights illuminating my subject obviously, and I took the shot. And in the second picture I used it in manual, remote manual. Now manual is just manual, so you just do the math and voila basically. So let's have a look. Oop. So this picture, as you can see here, the harsh shadows are gone because we're using 2 speed lights now. We're shooting an f8 as well. This is the auto, and I just explained how I did that. And this is the manual. So it's just slightly brighter. I got it nearly right. So I think that worked out pretty well actually, if you ask me. Yeah, I like the SU4 option. As I said, I think manual users are gonna love this one. Well, there you have 4 different ways that you can use this Speedlight off camera. Now, I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, prefer this way. Prefer using off camera flash over on camera flash. The PC syncing option uses, it's good for basic off camera wired flash, and if you want to use GN mode, because remember GN mode is not available with AWL. SU4 is again very easy to straightforward. I've used it before a couple of times and I really liked it. I'm gonna use that more. A TTL extension lead also makes sense if you want to use that sort of thing, but once again remember it's a shorter cable, and usually you have to hold your Speedlight with one hand and take the shot with hold the camera with the other hand. So But yeah, AWL is the compromise option between wired and wireless. But as you saw, AWL TTL is quite different from TTL and TTL BL. Even though the master itself does use TTL BL. And once again, if you choose to record the light from the commander itself and you set that to TTL, that's the entire exposure is just gonna look like TTL BL, like on camera TTL BL. You know, it's and that's the whole idea behind AWL TTL and AWL in general, is that you can have a wireless off-camera speedlight which has advanced functionality, and obviously not just one speedlight. You can have, you know, as many as you can fit. Well, not as many as you can fit, but you get the idea. And you know, people only really choose to use the remote groups, which is why I've placed so much importance on testing the remote groups. But yeah, having the brightest reflections at mid-tone level may mean that your pictures could come out underexposed if you're using just the groups, obviously, and AWL TTL as your key light. So you may need to use flash compensation, because remember, AWL TTL is not doing any averaging for the groups. It just drops all the brightest reflections to mid-tone, and that's basically what you get. So yeah, I do find myself using compensation, you know, quite a bit for that reason. But then again, no one said you can't use FV-lock and optically isolate whatever, you know, area the midtones naturally fall onto your subject, you know, based on the creative look that you're looking for, if you have the skill to identify that, obviously. But then, you know, and then recompose and shoot, much like you do with regular on-camera TTL. But yeah. And yes, adding multiple speedlights into the mix is very easy with AWL TTL, because your exposure doesn't change, it's only your looks change. So yeah, and but yeah, it's not so easy with the other flash modes, because they are just gonna end up adding on top of each other and overexpose if you're not careful. And you know, I like auto aperture with monitor flashes as an off-camera wireless flash. I think it makes a great key light. And manual is just manual. I mean, honestly, there isn't that much to conclude, because we've already discussed, you know, we've already covered what these modes do. And to tell the truth, the drawbacks of a certain option may be the benefits for some people, and vice versa. I mean, I can't tell you what works for you. Only you know that, you know. And I can test the speedlight for you, which is basically the purpose for these videos. And as you can see, all the photos I took are just test shots, you know. But yeah, what else can I tell you? The effective distance between the commander and the remotes is up to 7 meters or so for AWL and 10 for SU4, and if your remotes should be roughly 30 degrees off axis from the commander. Now, at least that's what Nikon says in the manuals for these things, but you know, I use some really weird setups, and it works like a charm, especially indoors. Now, outdoors you may have issues, of course, but don't forget that this is, you know, just don't forget this is not radio, but rather purely optical IR one-way communication. So you have to make sure that the remotes can see the commander. That's basically the IR sensor is pointed at the commander. That's kind of the idea, or at the wall that can reflect the commander, you know, easiest, if that makes sense. I may use, you know, personally, I may use TTL on all of my groups if I'm in a hurry, or if I'm outside and the ambient is high. I may also use AA on my environment groups if I need to light up a room, for example. Well, I usually just have one environment group. Manual mode is quite handy. I keep a copy of the guide number tables and flash durations for my speedlights on my phone. I like using manual. I think it's the easiest mode to use, if you ask me. But then I'll have some people disagree with that, especially people that shoot fast-moving subjects, fast-changing environments, that kind of stuff. But yeah, with all that being said, the series has now come to an end. Thank you for watching, and I think it, you know, I hope it helped you, and I hope it's useful, honestly. And the Nikon SB-910 is a great speedlight. It really is. I don't find it difficult to use as a user, and I'm aware that a lot of people say that it's difficult, but it's just, it's not a speedlight. It's not the speedlight itself that's complicated, but rather the people couldn't be asked to do an in-depth overview of it. You know, so that people can sit there and go through all, you know, watch a video like this one, for example, or a series that just goes through all the functions and you know, shows people that, hey, you know, this is what that does, kind of thing. It's not a speedlight that you can cover in 4 minutes. You know, it's just not. It's not. That's not gonna happen. But you know, other than that, it's I think it's pretty straightforward actually. But yeah, stay tuned for future videos. I have a whole bunch of subjects that I want to talk about in the future, and don't hesitate to ask if you've got anything that you have in mind you want me to talk about. You know, in next videos, in the upcoming I've got a whole bunch of things that I want to talk about, and you know, making this series was a lot of fun, and I've actually learned a bunch of things myself. And that's one of the reasons why I like making these videos, because I also get to learn stuff, and I'm also up for learning new things all the time. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video, and take care, be safe. It's 2020, you know, so anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.